Hello, everyone. This is Cody Lee of BlackCatBooks.org, author of I, the Dragon, Cruel and Beautiful Rabbit Hole Lore and Frame, the upcoming Jaw of the Dragon. I have actually been a bit on a bit of a platinum kick over the past couple of weeks. Ever since Bayonetta 3 came out, I've kind of been going back, experiencing the history of the company and playing like a handful of games that I haven't played in a while. Stuff like Mad World, stuff like the original Bayonetta, stuff like the Wonderful 101, and I think most interestingly, Vanquish. And it really does kind of reaffirm my opinion, my deeply held belief that Capcom fans are in complete denial of, that Platinum Games has been better than Capcom for quite a long time. And the main reason I think that Capcom has stayed afloat or stayed relevant in the eyes of the fans is mostly because, Platinum has had their development troubles. Games like Scalebound simply don't come out. And second of all, just pure brand blind fanboyism. It's really weird to me that Devil May Cry fans seem to have this weird obsession with pretending as if Bayonetta, which was from a development studio that worked on the original Devil May Cry, that is like a far inferior game to the Devil May Cry franchise. It seems almost universally accepted that the sequels to Devil May Cry, 3, 4, and 5 are far superior than the original, which is actually my favorite game in the series. I the way I look at it is that Devil May Cry was a prototype for what would eventually become Platinum Games signature action game style. I see Devil May Cry as a prototype to Bayonetta. In that sense, I do have a sort of interest in it, even if I don't think the game itself is all that great. But it's really weird, having recently played Devil May Cry 5 and having recently played Bayonetta 3, I've already gone on record about this, how much better Bayonetta 3 is as a release to Devil May Cry 5. But I think that extends to a large portfolio of a large portion of Capcom's output in the past couple of years. Because other than Ace Attorney and maybe Monster Hunter Rise, I don't think Capcom has really put out anything really good or interesting in quite a long time. Resident Evil 7 and 8 were flops. Lost Planet is a dead IP. You have all these Mega Man's dead. You have all these Street Fighters in the state it's in. You have all these issues with the company that nobody really wants to talk about or acknowledge. Meanwhile, Platinum Games, in spite of the issues they've had with their publishing partners over the years, most particularly Microsoft, and the Activision deal fell through. In spite of all of that, I think generally speaking, when it comes to a ratio, Platinum Games stops Capcom. Capcom has never put out anything like Vanquish. They've never put out something like Mad World. They've never put out something even on the level of the original Bayonetta. And they would never make something as off the wall or insane as the Wonderful 101. And I really do feel as if the blind fan, the bias against Platinum is mostly coming out in due to their very close association with Nintendo that they've had ever since 2013, in which they produced one of the very best Wii U games, the very best Wii U game, I would say, the Wonderful 101. It seems ever since that happened, back then Platinum could do no wrong, but after the Wonderful 101 came out, there was this very big concentrated effort to say that Platinum isn't cool anymore. They've gone downhill. They've become irrelevant. They've become obsolete. Purely because all of the major games they produced after that, Star Fox Zero, Astral Chain, and now Bayonetta 3, were Nintendo exclusives. In fact, the only game that got any kind of critical acclaim coming from traditional game journalists was Nier Automata. The one game in that list that did not deserve any attention or praise, and it was also the only one that was not a Nintendo exclusive. So it's interesting to kind of see where we're at here, in that people just don't want to admit that Platinum Games, the upstart, the Nintendo subsidiary, the company that's been putting out all these superior action games to Capcom, is like a real and viable threat to like Devil May Cry and Dragon's Dogma. In fact, like if Scalebound had actually come out, like I guarantee you it would have been like, more critically well received and popular than that Dragon's Dogma ever was. Dragon's Dogma is just its success and like popularity like is baffling to me. Like it feels like it is the berserk of like video games. And I don't mean that in a good way. In that sense where like it has this like fanatical following because like, ooh, it's dark fantasy, it's hardcore. Like it's just it doesn't feel the game isn't very well put together at all, and it has all these issues. I don't really understand or really respect like the awe that people have for that game. Again, like that is another example of another game that Breath of the Wild just stomped just a couple of years after it released, and now we're seeing like we're in that phase where people are like pretending to be excited for Dragon's Dogma 2. It's just like no, I don't think so. One release was enough. I am not checking out Dragon's Dogma 2. So. Um, Again, recently, like when I go back to Vanquish, when I really like discover those mechanics, when I discovered like that gunplay, when I discovered like the enemy design, like the boss design, the encounter design, even the stage, like the arena, it just feels like such a smooth, innovative, interesting, engaging third person shooter. I would argue like probably one of the best controlling, interesting third person shooters I've ever played. I think it's like a shame, like not quite as good as something like Devil's Third, but Devil's Third has like more better anime variety and I would say better bosses. But like in general, like Vanquish is like a cut above most action games in that respect because it actually feels like you're in the middle of an intense battle against these like androids in like this in the space station. It's cool, it's interesting, it's unique. It should have been more popular, and it's better than what Capcom is putting out. Like I played like Vanquish and Devil May Cry 5 around the same time, and honestly, like I feel like I would sooner go back to Vanquish. Honestly, I think Vanquish is like more challenging. It has more going for it. It's a lot more fun. It has a lot more personality. Like it feels like it has crazy good animation. Like it feels it very much. First of all, I really would like a Vanquish too, by the way. But like it's incredible how like well polished that game is, even like a decade after release. And like meanwhile, Devil May Cry 4 is just a game that kind of exists, honestly. Like people try not to talk about the numerous problems with it. It was outdated by 2008 standards. It has the backtracking issue. It tries to like force Nero as a protagonist. Like it does all this stuff that like doesn't really work and nobody really talks about that at all. But people like, oh man, Viola in Bayonetta 3, this is unacceptable. Like even though you play as Bayonetta for 85% of the game, like it's oh no, not Viola, like who is objectively more likable than Nero, by the way. That is another thing I really should be talking about. Like it's weird, right? The extent that the extent in which people will go to like downplay Bayonetta. Like criticizing the multiple playable characters in Bayonetta 3 when like, Devil May Cry 5 also had that but did it worse. Like, criticizing like the general design of Bayonetta 3 or like the look of the characters or like, anything really. When really like everything was in Bayonetta 3 was objectively better than not only Devil May Cry 5, but anything that Capcom has put out since like real talk, since probably RE4. Okay. Like I can't think of anything that really matched what Bayonetta 3 set out to do, honestly. And I play a lot of games. Like I'm not just talking out of my ass here. I know exactly what I'm saying. Like Bayonetta is just Platinum Games like dominated Capcom for a straight decade, and it feels like right now nobody wants to admit it.